It is about time to wind up the show, but of course, cannot do that before we talk about the International Women's Day that's coming up on Saturday. And there are several other events. There is a grassroots awards event as well on Friday, awarding the women, recognizing them. And of course, Beyond Zero, we know about that run led by the First Lady. That's also happening on Sunday on maternal health. I apologize, gentlemen, ladies, for keeping you so long, but you understand the chaotic scenes we're seeing this morning and just a need to be able to get some answers. But joined by Grace Mbugua, who's at the center, Executive Director, Women's Empowerment Link. And next to me, my immediate left, is Kennedy Otina, who's Regional Program Associate Men to Men. I'm putting it that wrong. And of course, Njoki Karoya, Communication Consultant. We appreciate you all for being with us. And Njoki, very quickly, women, a conversation that we have every other time. Some say there's so many Women's Days and every day a Women's Day. But in as far as the gains or where we are at now, how would you describe that?
Well, let's first start with that the International Women's Day is one day a year.
Yeah.
So there are not many days, just one day a year.
Right.
And then after that we have, say maybe Mother's Day, but now there's a Father's Day. So it's not about, talking about women constantly. It's just this one day. And this one day, basically what it does is it puts the spotlight on women and their status as at that time. So we look at whether they're still suffering any abuses, what are the gains they have achieved, has the movement brought in some respect towards their human rights. And so for the International Women's Day, ideally is to celebrate, how far women have come in terms of just gaining more respect and recognition of their human rights. And then secondly, to also just relook at the challenges, right, and see whether the strategies or the interventions that are in place to continue to expand their space, mainly towards human rights, is still being recognized. I mean, if they are working, and if they are not working, then perhaps we need to re-strategize, and if they are working, then perhaps we need to move on, on the same path.
Right, and Grace, the gains that have been made so far, what would you say those are?
I think the first thing, we must celebrate the fact that Kenyan women today especially are celebrating being citizens, full citizens. By that, we've been provided for by the Constitution. Right. The fact that we also, as Kenyan women, we have been able to speak out. And today we are celebrating having such a large number of women for the first time in Kenyan history of having in leadership in terms of the county level and in the national level. So for this, I think it's an year that we must also celebrate that. And then we know this is just the beginning. We should be able to see more women being able to contribute to the processes of the country, development, and then you can see today, as we are talking about the International Women's Day on 8th, we are talking about aspiring for change, the change that we want to see in this country as much as we see it globally, because it's a global international day, and we look forward to seeing the successes that women have been able to achieve.
Right. And Kennedy, you're with Men to Men. How is it that you're part of this conversation? Do you have an appreciation of the issues around the women, and also how do the two, if ever, work together, the men and the women?
Indeed, we do appreciate that there are issues that are supposed to be paid attention to in as far as the women's rights concerns are. And what we are saying is that whereas the issues around women's rights are critical, men must also take a very strong position in terms of promoting the same, because there's so much work that has been done. But the only challenge is that the attitude around men towards the women's empowerment is still a big issue that needs to be addressed. And this is because culture, society is pushing men to think that women are inconsequential. But for me, a person who is convinced that women are part and parcel of being human, is that I have a dear woman in my life. And so that is the reason why I need to change the world. Right. There's my daughter, there's my sister who needs to be taken care of. Yeah. So when we make this world better for everyone, then my daughter has a chance.
And you've captured it very well, Kennedy, with saying that, because in Njoki, what we see a lot, even when members of parliament are talking about women issues, they forget they were born by women. They forget they have some of them wives and sisters and daughters.
Sure.
What I think is that when men tend to talk about women, they tend to think about their wives or their girlfriends or their mistresses and how they just want to get more from them by contributing less. And in that space, they forget that when they speak about women, there's their daughters, there's their mother, because those are the two very key people that they will fight for and they live and die for, their daughters and their mothers. So they forget that and just focus on these other, basically strangers, people you get from the street and you love and you put in your home, but your mother, your daughter, that's totally different. And that's why that's why the International Women's Day has been very important, because one of the strategies that was appreciated way before was that we needed to engage men in terms of getting them to just begin to expand the space for women and to give them, space to just express themselves and enjoy human rights, just basic human rights. This is not even a contest for power. It is just a contest for recognition that I actually exist. I'm a human being. I've got my rights. I want to eat kuku like you. I want to walk here. I want to work this job, And if I can just go back to now why we have these 3 days, basically in terms of expanding the space, that you'll find that the International Women's Day mainly is led by the government. Right now it's been led by it's called the Directorate of Gender, formerly the Ministry of Gender and Social Services, but now it's under the Ministry of Devolution and Planning. And it's also led by the UN bodies because they support that particular program, the United Nations Joint Program on Gender Empowerment. And the idea is to bring more people on board. The plans in place for this particular event is to get all ministries to be involved, because gender mainstreaming is very important. When you're thinking about health, when you're thinking about devolution, whether it's agriculture, whether it's land, all the ministries now have to factor in gender mainstreaming, even the treasury, in terms of budgeting, because what has been lacking is more focus put on ensuring that the specific needs of both men and women are catered for. So this is going to be a national celebrations at the KICC, which will be followed by the marathon, again, that is being supported, I see, also by the Standard Group, quite strong, but it's also being led by also the UN agencies and government. And for the event on Friday, the idea basically is to begin to recognize women that we do not know.
Sure.
We know about our politicians, we see their faces, we know about our corporate executives, we see their faces, we follow them, we know their stories, but we don't know about the women at the grassroots level who are also doing just as much, but don't rarely get the limelight. So this is an opportunity to just put that limelight on them and to appreciate them for what they're doing in terms of just empowering girls and women at the grassroots. And the initiative is being led by, is it spearheaded by the National Gender and Equality Commission, together with mothers and daughters.
All right, Grace, and sometimes women are said to be their worst enemies in this, as much as we look at the men and say, yes, you're not understanding of the issues, or want to sideline the women or pretend there is not even any equality question, but sometimes women are their worst enemies.
I think I would first start by saying that actually women are not their worst enemies, because I would give you the scenarios of situations where there is need, and you will realize women support each other very much. I think this has been used as a stereotype to actually deal with, deal with the women issues as just a side issue. And I would emphasize, because, well, there has been so many times that we've had to deal with conflict and other issues where men are the ones only involved in the whole process. So what I would want to say is that women have a lot to contribute to the society, and they do not have to be seen as enemies to one another. We actually support each other more fruitfully. Maybe to look at, in terms of equality and the gains that we've had, today where we are, when we are celebrating International Women's Day, you're looking at what women in women organizations, women who have been champions, have been able to achieve, their commitment, a lot of sacrifices that have gone on the way. You can imagine the laws that we have today has gone in through a lot of advocacy. A lot of voices have had to go on the streets to say, please recognize the woman and her contribution to the country.
Yeah.
And most of all, so issues like violence. We've had to deal with violence. The resilience levels among women are in another level that we must appreciate. So in this International Women's Day, one of the things that we would want to celebrate is also the resilience level among women to cope with different dynamics, many roles that they have, reproductive roles, productive roles. They have to, be dynamic and have to deal with the challenges of not being recognized for a long time and the discrimination issues. So I think some of the things that we should be celebrating today is the strength of women working together.
Working together. And the global theme is inspiring change. But Kennedy, the local theme is really one that comes in at a good time. Badilisha fikira tuimarishe maisha wanawake, because looking at the political theme, do not have any elected woman governor, and even the senators as well. And that still needs a lot of what you were talking about earlier. A lot of change still needs to happen.
Yes, indeed. The problem has been that society has pushed a woman to be to a life of a kitchen, and yet the reality right now is that there's so much empowerment that has happened. So it's like women there are certain positions that are kind of reserved for men and not for women. And that is why there has to be a radical shift of ideology in terms of the way we look at women in leadership. If you compare what we've seen in terms of performance in ordinary leadership positions in Kenya, you can be more sure of the leadership capabilities of women compared to what we've seen in men. Look at the corruption that we are talking about as a country. Where is it indeed? Where does it lie? If you look at the violence that we are seeing, who is behind this violence? It's all the men, and it's the men who are behind this violence. And as such, then why is it that the society is kind of trying to push a woman to certain peripheral kind of positions and not entrusting them with positions that are, that can bring meaningful change? And this is what we want to change, so that by the end of the first 5 years, then we can be sure that women can also ascend to positions of the governors, senators, and any other position that they are competent in handling.
Right. And finally, Njoki, our time is up, but in this focus on women issues, we talked about the gains. Of course, there are numerous challenges. What for you is the take-home for women watching right now as they mark the International Women's Day, as well as we are celebrating the women at the grassroots level on Friday, as we run on Sunday as well?
First and foremost, can I just go back onto the women are the worst enemies? Because I think that is a very, it's a great strategy that is used by men to disunite women.
Right.
Because some of the reasons that they use for saying that women are their own worst enemies is maybe when you see women fighting or whatever, but we see that in men as well. So it's they pick this instance and then they shout about it like as if it's something weird when it isn't. I mean, conflict is a human thing. I mean, you have a different idea, I have a different idea, so we have to but when men fight, it's okay. When women fight, it's news. Anyway, in terms of the gains, I think what we need to be celebrating is that we've come from where we could not express ourselves, where we were confined to small spaces, to where now we have women in leadership, we have women in academia, we have women in corporate, we have women taking the lead in a lot of these areas, and you can see that there's progression. Even when you look at, say, the KCSE results and the KCPE results, you always see women are beginning to shine. And women are shining so much, the extent that now there is focus on the boy child. So for me, I think what it means is that we're moving forward, we're increasing our space, we need to increase it further because we still have pockets, and when I say pockets, it's pockets that contains hundreds and thousands of women who are still suffering female genital mutilation, who are still suffering sexual abuse, rape, defilement, who are still suffering physical abuse, who are still suffering denial in political participation, who are still suffering unfair remuneration in the corporate world, who are still suffering they lack opportunities at education. I mean, we've seen the stories of areas where girls are unable to access sanitary pads, they can't go to school, and obviously they lose that. I mean, when you go back to school after a week of not being in school, obviously you're losing out on education, and you come back, you feel a bit lost. So there are all all these issues that we need to look at. We still have issues of early marriage. So all these things are things that as women we still need to champion to ensure that these inequalities, one, are not there, two, that everybody, whether it's a man, a woman, a boy, a
It's
girl,
part of the solution.
is part of the solution, and everybody enjoys their God-given human rights. They don't belong to anyone.
Well said. Njoki Karoya, communication consultant, Grace Mbugwa, who's executive director, Women's Empowerment Link, Kennedy Otina, regional program associate, Men to Men. We appreciate you for being with us this morning. Apologies for that short time because of the other stories we are following as well. But of course, Njoki will be seeing you Wednesday as we shift our focus on gender issues as well, and gives some of those conversations prominence right here on Morning Express. Thank you, and all the best with your work, James.
Absolutely.